Nice. If you were hoping to see Sunil today, unfortunately, he won't be joining me. He's back in Seattle. He's going to an event next week. So he was like, Chris, can you present this all by yourself? Sure, let's do it. So I'm Chris Gardy. I'm a senior program manager based in Fargo, North Dakota. It is cold up there right now. It is below freezing, so I'm glad I'm here with you. How's everyone doing? Good? Who has finance and operations? Yes. Who has it on-premise? On-prem, one. And the rest of you are cloud, I assume? Okay. And then, what do I have in the room? Customers? Yes. Partners? A lot of partners. ISVs? A few? Okay, good. Sounds good. So we're going to be talking about business process integration for finance and operations, what's new and planned. Largely, we're going to be talking about business events and business actions. We're going to look at workflow to flow or workflow to Power Automate, I guess it would now be called. But I'm going to be grabbing some feedback from you during if it loads. There's this thing called Mentimeter. Who's seen a presentation from Kevin Honeyman or Jason Green? Yes, no? There's one. All right, good. They always use this. They love it, swear by it. It's a good way to get feedback from you guys during the presentation, and then we're going to touch on this at the end, and I can go through additional questions that you might have. During the presentation, you can just sign into menti.com, and then 559005 is the code to enter into the web page there. So if you have any feedback during the presentation that you want to give me, that would be good, and we can address those questions at the end on a follow-up slide. So 559005. Let's see if it'll let me switch slides. I can click. Can I go back? Yes, good. Okay, so we're going to look at some core concepts. We're going to talk about business value for business events and business process integration in general. We're going to talk about where we are. We're going to talk about what's new. I'm going to show you a couple of demos. I'm going to show you the business events catalog, the completing work items in Power Automate, handling alerts in Power Automate, and then we'll talk about what we've got planned for the future. So I should ask as well, who's seen business events and finance and operations before? Yep, a smattering. Okay, so some of you might be interested in what's new versus what's there. Great, so core concepts. So we have this business process lifecycle diagram that we like to talk about. Within finance and operations, the core of what we do is about data, whether that's master data or transactional data. So data is the cornerstone of finance and operations and your business. It's the key for your business. And really, it all starts there. Added on to that, there's a bunch of business actions that people will be taking. So whether that's inside of the web client, just ad hoc, moving through the user interface, or they're following some predefined workflow, some predefined process. They're going to be taking a bunch of actions. Those result in business events. We've added a bunch of business events into the product in the application layer and the workflow for alerts. And so those things that they're doing result in task events and workflow events. And then there are business actions that you can then take in response to those business events. So those business events can now be piped out to Power Automate, to a flow. They can be piped out to Event Grid or Service Bus so that you can take advantage of those. And then you can call back into finance and operations and trigger off business actions as well via OData actions on data entities. So let's talk about business value. So business events and business actions give you near real-time business process integration across systems between finance and operations and your other systems. And it allows you to move away from scheduled polling and batch processing. So it allows those systems to not have to check when data has changed, allows them to not have to know what that data is and how it's going to change. They can just watch for a specific event, and then they can use that event to trigger some other process. This results in the process being more efficient, allows for improved cash flow, allows you to act immediately, allows people to act immediately, allows the systems to act immediately as well. And you'll get user productivity gains so that you can add more value elsewhere. So you'll be able to make decisions more quickly. The users will know about things more quickly, and they'll be able to make decisions in response to those events more quickly. There's also less configuration and setup, because when you're targeting a specific event and it's going to do a specific thing, you don't have to look at the data and understand how the data needs to change or will change in response to some event. You can just target that particular event. And it gives you near real-time visibility into what's going on, and improved user and customer satisfaction allows you to be more responsive to your customer needs. So when a sales order comes in, you can know about it. When some piece of data changes, you can know about it right away, get that notification, start reviewing things. And then you can move into less coupled integrations. So you can decouple those separate systems from finance and operations because they can target specific events rather than having to understand the data inside of finance and operations. They don't have to understand the entities necessarily and how the data in them changes. They can just look at that business event and know when that event is triggered. So some use cases. So Sunil and I, about this time last year actually, started talking to partners and ISVs about business events and what was going to be possible. And part of that was gathering a bunch of use cases, a bunch of information about did we understand the concept of business events clearly? Were we adding the right business events? Were we going to the application teams and driving the right level of business events? So here's a couple of use cases, and we have these documented out in the documentation. You can see a link to that down the bottom there. There's 20, 30 use cases out there. Probably should have checked the exact number so I could quote that. But I grabbed a couple that stuck out to me. So in one, a gentleman's calling out the procurement process and talking about how it frequently relies on manual intervention. And he talks about how he wants to alert the procurement managers when a quotation request is sent so that they can follow up and engage with the customer faster. And then they want that engagement to happen within 3 days. So they can set a timer for 3 days from now, schedule something to remind them to do that follow-up. In the one on the right, the production scheduling process relies on external systems and optimization engines to finalize the schedule. And they want to improve the integration and automation capabilities by creating a business event that gets triggered when the production order is scheduled. And they can watch for that particular business event, and then they can communicate that to the downstream systems. And they called out field service, Dynamics 365 field service, their IoT, data exchange, and some other third-party systems. So there's a number of business cases out there that you can go out and read to learn about the value of responding to these business events. So where are we? With business events, we previewed it in Platform Update 24, and it was generally available in Platform Update 26. So you can get Platform Update 29. So I hope everyone's on a more recent build so that they've got access to these business events. And then business actions are just OData actions on data entities, and that's been possible for quite some time. And we'll look at an example of that a little bit later on. So we added a bunch of business events. The kind of the four biggest areas that we lit up were the procure to pay scenario. So when you're trying to procure something and you're going through that whole process all the way until you pay for it. The order to cash scenario, we worked with the supply chain management team in Copenhagen and the financials team in Fargo to light up that order to cash scenario. So placing an order all the way, or someone places an order with you all the way through to you actually collecting the cash at the end. And then we lit up alerts, so it's possible to create alerts within finance and operations to know when data changes, when the records are created. And then we added a large number of events around our workflows system. The workflow system is something that I own personally, and that's primarily how I got involved in business events. And there are hundreds of events around workflow once you've got all the configurations in there. It's a very simple programming model, business events, and it allows for easy definition and triggering. You basically just create a contract. You're creating a contract or a payload, and you're filling that up with some data, and then calling a method just with a single line to trigger that event, to pass it off to the business events framework. And then the framework handles the rest. So it takes care of sending that event to wherever it should go, to whatever process has subscribed to it. And we support a number of different models. So if you use a push model, you can send events to Event Grid and Service Bus to popular subscribers. And then the pull model is the most popular, and that's subscribing to events from Power Automate. So going into Power Automate, pointing at your environment, pointing at that event that you're interested in, and then getting a trigger based on that, and then you can do notifications, you can kick off processes on third-party systems, you can do any number of things. And then business actions on the data entities, you can call those from Power Automate and really any other service that can call a REST action. So that push model again, just to kind of walk through that. So inside of finance and operations, the administrator is going to set up an endpoint. They're going to set up an endpoint for either Event Hub or Service Bus. Those are the ones that we support out of the box. You can add other endpoints if you're interested in other ways to consume business events. They're going to set up a subscription to the event, and they're going to push it to the endpoint. They're going to send it to the endpoint. And then in finance and operations, an administrator or some user is going to trigger that event. They're going to check, the administrator's then going to check their receiving service to check that event message came through. And then someone can then do something in response to the message. So you've got kind of three pieces in play: finance and operations, the event grid, and then that message consumer, that separate system that's going to be watching event grid or service bus to take that message and then do something with it. In the pull model, it's a little bit simpler. So you're going to go into Power Automate, and I say Power Automate, there are HTTP webhooks as an endpoint that you can make use of for business events, but Power Automate is the easiest way to take advantage of the pull model. So in Power Automate, an administrator or a power user is going to go in and create a flow using the when a business event occurs trigger. And we'll see an example of that in just a second. And then in finance and operations, they can just trigger that event and they can check the outcome. And you can see the event running through inside of Power Automate. So it's really very simple. In this scenario, there's just a couple of different things that you have to worry about. So just finance and operations and Power Automate. You just move in between those systems. And then for business actions, if you want to light up a business action or add a business action, in Power Automate, the administrator is going to create a flow, and they're going to include an execute action block. So when I show workflow to flow or workflow to Power Automate, sorry if I trip up on that a few times, you just add an execute action block, and I'm going to show that. And when the flow runs in Power Automate, that execute action gets called so that OData action on the data entity gets triggered, passes in the parameters, and then finance and operations can respond to that. So this is an example of the OData actions. Yeah, you can. That might be a little small. Sorry, I should have blown that up. But a good example of the OData actions on data entities is the workflow work item entity. And this is that entity, so this is the very top of that entity. I'm told that this has a pointer. No, that's not very good. So in this workflow work item entity, you can come in here, and the two that I've highlighted are right at the top, the validate method and the complete method. And you're just going to create a static method like those that takes the record identity as a parameter. You're going to attribute that with sys OData action, and then you can call that from Power Automate or other consumers via the finance and operations connector using the execute action. So that's exactly what we did when we added the ability to complete work items from what is now Power Automate. we just added these actions for validating work items and then being able to complete the work items, being able to pass in the outcome that you want. So let's take a quick look at the business events catalog so I can give you an idea of the business events that are out there. And my machine, of course, has gone to sleep. Okay, great. We'll just refresh this web client session. Great, so the business events catalog, you can get to it just by going up to the search in finance and operations and searching for business events. And the first item that pops up will just be this business events catalog. So it's nice and easy to remember. So the catalog has a large number of events defined. They fall into a number of different categories. You'll see a couple up here for alerts, the first and third ones, and maybe I'll zoom that in so it's a little bit easier to see. So the first and third ones here are alerts. Then there's a number of application events that are listed in here, so expense management, purchase orders, accounts receivable, things like payment posted, maintenance request is created. There's a bunch of asset management ones in there. So there's a bunch of application business events that are kind of listed near the top. And then you get into the workflow business events. So there are business events for when a workflow is started and stopped, when an element or a block within that workflow is started and stopped, when a work item is created so that you can go ahead and act on that and complete that work item. There's automated tasks. So when an automated task starts, there's an event for that as well so that you can respond to that out in flow. Under the endpoints, you've got all of the endpoints available. So when you say new, you'll be able to pick from the list of endpoints. You've got a couple related to Service Bus, a couple related to Event Grid, and then you've got these other ones here. So the not yet renamed Microsoft Flow, HTTPS, so that's webhook. There's a test endpoint, which you won't see in your systems, but also Azure Blob Storage. You can send the event directly to Azure Blob Storage and respond to it that way. So in the push model, you go ahead and create the endpoint, and then you'll go ahead and define some subscriptions for those events. There's also an error log that lists off any errors that you might have. You can set up security related to the events as well. Great, so we'll pop back to the presentation. So what's new related to business events? So we've been using it for a little while now. We've gotten feedback from customers and partners and ISVs, and we've had some bugs come in. We've fixed a number of bugs, but these are some of the more interesting things to mention. So in the workflow business events, specifically in PU26, we added record details. So now in any of the workflow business events, there's a copy of the record JSON serialized inside of the payload. So you can see that record directly when you're responding to the workflow business event. So that was added in PU26. There was also a web client deep link added in PU29. So out in Power Automate, once you get that business event from workflow, you can go ahead and put that link into a notification or an approval request to the user so that they can then come back into the web client and adjust that record as needed or review that record if they want to. We also put completion options in the payload in PU29 so that you can take advantage of those directly. And then in PU32, which is just finishing up next Wednesday actually, the alerts business event, the payload, we've improved that. So Murray Fife, I was presenting with him in Atlanta in June on business events, and he had a set of flows set up. He had about 7 flows that he ran through that were all triggered from a business event where he took an alert and then he added a bunch of information to it and parsed information out of the message, the payload that came out. We basically sat down with him and said, why do you have 7 flows that are needed? And so we've added a bunch of information into the alerts payload so that you can respond to alerts in just one flow rather than having to go ahead and add a bunch of additional information. So we added field name and label so that you don't have to go and get that table name and label, the data area ID, the legal entity or company ID is what that is the technical name for. And then key value 1 and 2 from that record. We also passed that out. That was previously passed in the message details, and you had to parse that out. But now we've got that added in there as just fields that show up in the payload, and you can take advantage of those in Power Automate. And then there's a web link in there as well. So we're taking advantage of the capabilities that we have in the workflow business events to put a web link in there for the alert business events as well, so that someone can go back in and see that record that was just created or just changed. On the connector as well, we've got a couple of improvements that are coming. This one's actually in the works, and it'll be released out of band, so it's not tied to PU32. You should just see that show up in the connector here in the next few weeks. And that's when a business event occurs, when a business event occurs trigger. Right now, the legal entity is compulsory, and we are going to make that optional. That's something that was possible in the event grid and service bus consumers, and we only just recently realized that, oh yeah, we've been putting in the legal entity because we've been made to in Power Automate or Flow, so we've made that optional now. So let's have a look at completing workflow work items via Power Automate. But first, an introduction. So why did we enable this scenario? What are the benefits of completing workflow work items in Power Automate? So the work item, I should say right off the bat, it still appears inside of the web client. You can still approve the work item in the web client. But we've enabled, by enabling it to come out to Power Automate and the completion to flow back in, we've enabled approval via email, which was a very widely requested capability. You can also approve via the mobile app, via what was Microsoft Flow, now Power Automate app. In addition, you can take advantage of all of the notification options that you have inside of Power Automate. So the mobile app, text messages, putting that information out to Teams, to a Teams channel, and many others. And then you can trigger other processes in response as well. So you could notify someone or send a copy of the record that's going through a workflow. You can send that to a partner or a customer. So this is an example of the email, and hopefully I'll be showing you this live in just a minute. But there is a standard approval request capability within Power Automate, and we take advantage of that and the templates that we've provided for you out in Power Automate. And then the outcome options that are listed there, those are the same outcome options that are shown inside of the web client. So you can approve, reject, and request change. And when you click on one of those outcome options, you can then add a comment in here. And then once you've submitted that, then the email actually changes to let you know that, yep, you've taken care of this action item. And this is an example of the Flow app sending you a notification about some approval requests. So that is super handy, and then you can click on that. You get a nice little summary. The link there is valid. The other thing that you can do is you can provide more details. So I haven't provided any details in here, but you can provide more details in the emails and the notifications so that they show up directly there. So you can put details from the record inside of those notifications. To facilitate work item completion and Power Automate, it's a very simple process. You're going to go ahead and, inside of Finance and Operations, you're going to create a workflow configuration, and I'll show you that briefly in a second. In Power Automate, you're going to go in there and you're going to make use of the template that we've provided you. If you search for FinOps and then search for the work items template, you'll be able to find that real easily. you'll put in some quick values, and then optionally you're going to change the notification approval text and adjust any approval retry and timeout limits that you might have. You save it, and it's going to save a subscription to that business event back inside of Finance and Operations. So let's have a look at that. Great. So, yes. So first you're going to create a workflow configuration. So I have the Finance and Operations workflow editor over here. Who has used this before? Yes, begrudgingly, I'm sure. So this workflow editor is one that you'll be able to do just the simplest of configuration inside of now. So there's an approval block up here for this free text invoice workflow that I'm configuring. I've just dragged this free text invoice block onto the surface, connected it between the start and end blocks, and then the significant thing that I've done in here is inside of the approved free text invoice block, I've set up the assignment. So you just go into the assignment, and then under user, I have the admin and myself set up so that we both get approval requests. And then you need to make sure that you set up whatever completion policy you want. So by default, all of the approvers will be required, but you can switch it back to single approver. And that enables just one person to do the approval. So if you wanted to send an approval to multiple users, perhaps you just want to notify one of those users and you want the other one to actually do the approval, you can facilitate that by setting this completion policy to a single approver. So once you've set up that configuration, now inside of the free text invoice form, I'll just kick off one of these workflows. So I should probably just show you this quickly. Oh, here it is. So the free text invoice workflow is in the accounts receivable workflows form. You'll just hit new, and you will go to the free text invoice, customer free text invoice workflow right there, to create one of those configurations. And then once you've configured that, you just come to the all free text invoices form, and then you can create a new one. So we'll just create a new one for this first customer, Contoso Europe 1. And then we'll just add a single line. Then we'll hit save. And then once you hit save in Finance and Operations, the workflow subsystem or the workflow framework will run, and it'll say, oh, yep, this record has a workflow enabled for it. So it'll pop this workflow menu. You can go ahead and submit that record to the workflow, and we'll just put a comment in there so we can differentiate these. So I've asked it to approve. Now, in the workflow menu, there's a view history form. There's a workflow history form that shows you the process that's going through. So right now, it's just in the submission stages, and then the batch process is going to pick up that submission. It's going to create work items for the admin and I, and then the flow that I have is going to grab that. So let's go and have a look at that flow. So I've got this one just here. I'm going to show you creating this. I remember. Great. So out in Power Automate, I'm going to say new and create from template. In the search templates, the easiest way to find the Finance and Operations ones is just to type in fin space ops. And then you're going to be presented with a number of templates. So there is the PU26 one on the left-hand side, and then up the top here is this PU29 complete workflow work items template. So we're going to open that up. It's going to look for the connections that I have active, and yes, I want to use those connections. And then the template lays out all of the blocks with all of the values. The three that I have to fill in are this when a business event occurs trigger. So I'm going to select my environment. I've got my work item, and then I'm going to say my business event is this approved free text invoice. So you can see Power Automate has a fantastic kind of lookup filtering capability where you can just type in the field and it'll filter that down. USMF. So I've got that trigger now all configured. We parse out the JSON, and then in the validate work item, I can go ahead and fill in the instance here as well. You occasionally will see this bad gateway error. That is one that we're working on, but have no fear, it has no effect. Once I've filled out the instance, it found that action. So this validate work item block is an example of the execute action block that I was talking about before. So under action, right now we have the workflow work items entity validate method selected in here, but you have access to all of the OData actions that are exposed on the data entities within finance and operations, and any actions that you add onto your data entities will also show up in here, so you can take advantage of those. You could check the status of something, you could retrieve some data, you can really do anything you want. In this example, this validate one, we're passing in the workflow work item instance ID. It's the ID for the work item, and then we get back a Boolean value, a true false. Is this ready to be completed inside of Power Automate, or does the user need a notification that they need to go back into finance and operations in the web client and edit that record to add some additional data? So once we've validated it, if it comes back with no, then we're going to send them a notification. If yes, then we're going to send them an approval. We're going to make use of the list of outcomes that we added in Platform Update 29 to send them the response options that we should be sending. And then the final execute action, there's that bad gateway message again. And then once I specify the instance or the environment URL, the action is picked up and the standard parameters that are specified in the template, they just pop up here, and you can take advantage of those. So that one is ready to go now. So you can hit save, and that will now respond to workflow work items from the approved free text invoice workflow. But I already had one created, so I'm going to go back to that one. I just did that one to show you how easy that is. Literally, when you hit save, it just adds a subscription into the environment. But I want to make sure that I have something positive I can show you. So I've submitted that free text invoice workflow, and now I've got two running. So I've got one running for the administrator, and I've got one running for me. So let's click on this top one, and we'll see which person this is for. So you can see the body of the message. This is the payload of the business event in here. So we've got all of these details, like the list of outcomes. We've got the link to web right here. And if I just scroll through here, I should be able to find out who this is for. Yeah, this is for the admin. So the other one is me. So we'll just go to the second one. And I will just double check that that is me. No. Apparently the first one is me. Scroll through, yes, security. Great, so this one is me, and then it's run through and it's validated. It's seen that there's no more additional fields that need to be populated on the free text invoice, and it's sitting at this approval stage. So for approval, I can go into the flow approvals place. I could on my app, I got a flow approval request sitting there waiting for me, but also in email, I've got an approval request waiting for me. Let me see if I can get it this way. Was that me? I think so. Is that opening on some screen? No. Okay. Let's try and find that. So we've got this request for approval. So there's the request for approval that I sent with the comment that I entered, the please approve 1200, and then because you asked nicely, I will approve that. So that is approving that free text invoice via workflow via email. And we'll just close that. And then back here, you can see the email message updates as well, so that it shows, yes, this was submitted, you selected approved, and then here's the comment that you entered in. So there's a nice kind of audit trail or information about that. And you can see now that this has run successfully. It completed through the approval stage, and we can see that it has called execute action, and it's passing in the comment and the approve outcome that I passed in, and it's passing it in as me. Yeah, even though the flow was set up to run as the administrator at Contoso AX7, the tenant ID that I have, it's completing it as cguardy@microsoft.com. Great. So now back in finance and operations, if I close this workflow history form, then on the header, I will be able to see, no, I won't, because it's not on the header, it's only on the list. Let me refresh this data. So the last one that's not posted, we'll just pop to that one and then scroll across, and then we can see that the workflow status for that one is approved. And we should be able to see if I have the right one selected. Let me just double check that. No, it really doesn't want to select that record for me. Just gonna refresh that. But you can see inside of it, you can go into the workflow history and you can see exactly what has happened with that work item. Here we go. We'll be able to see that it was completed from flow. So this is the please approve 1200 comment that came out, and then back in because you asked nicely was the comment that I added inside of the email, and that got sent in for the completion. And you can see that completion type single approver that I called out just before. Great. Great. So that is workflow 2. Completing workflow work items via Power Automate. So we walked through this, so I didn't need those backup slides. Great. So another demo scenario that I'll show you is handling alerts via Power Automate. We'll go through this one a little bit faster because the alerts is kind of a simpler concept, but it'll give you a flavor for another business event type. So handling alerts via Power Automate, why would you want to do this? So the alert still appears in the web client. It appears in the notifications panel. And then by handling it out in Power Automate, you have all of those notification options that I mentioned before. And you can, again, trigger other processes in response, which is very common on the alert side of things. If you have used any of the other Dynamics 365 products like sales or field service, you'd be familiar with the data change events that are possible to respond to in Power Automate. And Alerts gives you that capability inside of finance and operations. So you can set up the data creation and data change events that you're interested in as alerts, and then you can respond to those out inside of Power Automate. So for example, if you wanted to send a transaction to a partner and customer, you could create an alert on record creation of that transaction type. Or if you wanted to respond to the record change and send that data on to be reviewed by manager, you can set a change alert for that record type. So again, you can send off notifications. So this is an example of a notification message being sent off to my inbox. So you can make them simple like this. You've got the rule, the subject, the message details, the user that triggered that alert. But you have some other information that you can take advantage of. And then once you have Platform Update 32, it'll be a little bit easier to get the record identity. And then you can make a request back into Finance and Operations via the connector to get the full record context if you wanted to populate that email message with a copy of the record that was updated or some other related data. So handling the alerts via Power Automate is fairly simple again. You're going to take advantage of one of two events. There's an alert event, and then there's a due date alert event. So one is looking for changes. The other one is responding to due dates. Inside of Finance and Operations, you're going to create an alert, and you're going to mark it as send externally. And I'll show you an example of that. And then, no, you're not going to take advantage of the template. Sorry, the final steps there are wrong. You're going to take advantage of the business event, when a business event occurs trigger. You're going to take advantage of that. You're going to fill in the environment URL, and then you're going to fill in the alert category and pick the change-based alerts. So let's go and have a look at that. So inside, yes, good, you can still see this. Inside of Finance and Operations, again on the free text invoice list page, on the Options tab in the Action pane, we've got, under Share, we've got Create a Custom Alert and Manage My Alerts. So I'll just click on Create a Custom Alert. If you wanted to set up a new alert, you just go into the form that data is on, go to the Options tab, click Create a Custom Alert, and then this dialog is going to come out. And the one important thing that you're going to do in there is you're going to indicate that it should send that alert externally. So down under Alert Me With, you just flip that to Send Externally. And you don't need to worry about any of the other details. With the alerts, you can send an email from Finance and Operations, but since we're sending it to the business event, we can handle that in Power Automate, and we can let Power Automate take care of the notification either via email or text or sending it to Teams. And then you can see up here it's automatically populated the information that we're interested in, so the customer free text invoice table name, and then the record has been created event. But you can flip that to deleted, and you can watch for changes on particular fields as well. So I've already got one set up, so I'll just show you the Manage My Alerts option. So inside of Manage My Alerts, I've already created this alert. So this is how you can create either multiple alerts, or if you've already created an alert, you can come in here and you can delete that if you're no longer interested in changes or creations or deletions on that record type. So you can see the one that I set up. And you can see that that's set to send externally. If you forget to send externally, you can just edit this and flip that send externally toggle. So since I have that alert already created, when I go out to flow, if I wanted to create a flow to handle that alert, as I mentioned, I would just automated from blank is the option that I'm going to have. and then 144 handle alerts demo. You'll put in a flow name. Inside of the flow trigger, I'm going to put in FinOps, and it's going to find all of the FinOps related triggers. When a business event occurs, it's going to pop to the top. So you can say create on that. And then a very similar process to what we looked at just before. You're going to select your environment URL for the instance. Under the category, you're going to say alerts this time. For the business event, I'm interested in when an alert rule is triggered. And then under the legal entity, right now you have to populate that legal entity. Soon enough, you will be able to leave that blank so that you can respond to all legal entities. But then once you have that, you're going to say next step, and you're going to parse that. You're going to parse the JSON payload that comes out of that business event. So I can specify parse JSON, and then back in the business events catalog, I can go to this business alerts event, download the schema. So I select the event, that change-based alerts event, and then I'm going to download the schema, which is actually a schema example. And then I can generate from sample, put in my JSON payload, and click done. And it gives me that schema that I was interested in. And then the other thing that you'll do is pass into the content the body of the business event, the body of the payload. So once you've set that up, then you can go through and you can do anything you like. You can send that notification to someone. You can go and retrieve the record again from finance and operations. So if you were interested in doing that, you would put in FinOps again, and then you would go and get that record. You can see that's available here. You can send off a notification. Yeah, you can do anything you want with it. What I am going to go and have a look at is the one that I already had set up. And it just had an execution 18 minutes ago, which was when I created that free text invoice to complete the work item out here in Power Automate. So let's have a look at that run, and you can have a look at the data that came through there. So when a business event occurs, and this is the alert rule body, so you can see right now it's a little bit lacking. So we've got the table ID. As I mentioned, the table name is something that we'll be putting in there in the future. You know which legal entity this is for now, but once that legal entity can be left blank, we'll also have the legal entity in the message. So there's a bunch of other data that will start populating into this alert payload. Once I parsed that out, I then used this send an email block, and I'll actually go to the design to show you what I did there. So in the send an email block, I just sent an email to myself, alert rule triggered, and then the rule ID, and then you've got the ability to pass in additional fields. So if I wanted the message as well, I can just type in message, and then I can click on message, and then that value will come out as well. And so the alert email that was generated for that, there it is. There's that example there. So that was the free text invoice that got free text invoice creation that I did to trigger the approval. You can see the alert rule triggered at 4:29, and then the approval request came in at 4:31. So there was just a minute or two between those two events. Great. So let's pop back to the slides and have a look at the backup slides that I have, just in case my demo doesn't work, but it did, so that's good. So what's planned around business events? Well, we have mostly completed phase one of what we set out to do around workflow to flow, or what is now called Power Automate. Phase one was adding a bunch of business events for the workflow work items, or the around workflow. So we have events that come out for every configured workflow, every configured workflow element, and work item that gets created from those task and approval elements. And we enable completion via our flow, so via Power Automate. In phase 2, we're adding instant flow support. So we're adding a flow menu into finance and operations, similar to you see in the customer engagement products, so sales, field service, the CRM-based products. We're going to be adding a trigger so that you can add instant flows for finance and operations that users can trigger, and then eventually you'll be able to define buttons. When a user triggers those instant flows, that will also trigger a business event so that you can keep watch on those, get notifications when someone triggers an instant flow if you're interested in that. And then in phase 3, we're doing something, this work should start in about a month or two. That's adding some business process flow support. So the business process flows that you see inside of Dynamics 365 sales and field service, we're going to start adding support for business process flows inside of finance and operations, and you can expect that about a year from now. And there'll probably be previews of that in kind of six or so months. So we'll be in touch with people. Who's in the preview program? Yes, and active on Yammer? Yes, good. Okay, so if you aren't in the preview program and you're interested in the latest changes around finance and operations, you should get into the preview program. Being in the preview program also gives you access to the Yammer group so that you can send us feedback, and we also announce things via that Yammer group and ask questions. There's also specifically a channel around business events so that you can get into that channel and you can talk to us about your experiences with business events, any problems that you're having, any additional things that you'd like to see. Application business events and business actions, so those are being added over time. Please submit ideas and feedback, so you can go to the ideas portal to submit those ideas. You can also go into the Yammer group to provide us that feedback. But please provide that feedback to the application team so they know what business events and actions they should add and what capabilities you're interested in taking advantage of. Will it change? I mentioned the use cases that are out there in the documentation repository. So if you search for finance, space operations, space business, space events, so finance, operations, business events, you'll quickly find the business events documentation that we have out there. We have documentation about the business events, how to take advantage of the workflow business events and all of the other business event types, how to take advantage of them in Flow or Power Automate. And then, as I mentioned, there's a Yammer group specifically for business events that you can take advantage of once you're in that preview program. And I would definitely recommend doing that. So let's see if this loads. So that menti.com feedback around business events and actions and related capabilities that we should be adding. So someone said move business logic from the workflow setup to Power Automate. Yes, so part of our work to add support for business process flows, we're going to be looking at how to best leverage the business logic that's built into tasks and approvals in the workflow metadata in finance and operations. So we'll be having a look at that, definitely. Can we export attachments from Dynamics 365 to Power Automate? So there isn't an attachments entity that we ship out of the box. You can create entities for attachments that you're interested in. So if you're interested in sales order attachments, you can create a sales order attachment entity. If you're interested in customer attachments, you can create a customer attachments entity. The reason we don't have a generic entity is because data entities don't have a generic identity. They don't have a rec ID, if you're familiar with the developer side of finance and operations. They don't have a common identity. So you need to set up a data entity that understands the identity of the record and then can grab the attachment related to it and pull it out. And then I haven't actually tried passing attachments around inside of Power Automate. So that's an interesting bit of feedback. I should give that a go. Thinking it would be a good idea to just disable alerts, maybe set at a schedule for the alert to trigger. This is an alert management, just allowing disabling of alerts. I don't understand. So if anyone has any other questions, they can come up to the microphones, or if they're shy, they can raise their hand and I can repeat the question as well. So if someone could explain what that one meant, I might have to think about that a little bit. Align the naming convention and data management with the naming and Power Automate. Okay, that's good feedback. Yep, I'll pass that back to Sunil as far as that drop down of data entities. Yeah, okay, we'll look at that. That's good feedback. And then in the endpoints, displaying the flow name in addition to the flow ID. The flow name in addition to the, yes. Yeah, that's something that we've been looking at. So if I go back into my machine and I look at the business event catalog, inside of the endpoint name, you can see the ID is listed here. Interestingly, this GUID doesn't show up. The name is flow endpoint underscore and then a GUID. The GUID, the unique ID, the globally unique ID that is associated with the flow, it doesn't seem to show up anywhere in the Power Automate or Flow user interface. So it's very hard to track things down as far as this is concerned. So yes, we're going to work on that, getting the flow names out there.
I think it might show up you go to share the flow and you're actually sharing the ID in there. I think you can copy.
Yeah, the comment is if you go to share the flow, it pops the GUID in there.
I think so. Yeah.
Okay, I might have to try that. Yeah, I might have to try that. Any other questions? Comments? So I'll just pop back.
Can I ask a question, please?
Yeah, sure.
Maybe just a too general a question. Is there any guideline from your side on where would it be recommended to use Power Automate as opposed to Logic Apps?
So yeah, so Power Automate as opposed to Logic Apps. So Steven Siciliano, who's the PM director for Flow, has a really good spiel that he does on Power Automate versus Logic Apps. I should probably have that slide in here so that I can refer to it. Basically, Power Automate takes advantage of Logic Apps. When you create a flow inside of Power Automate, it's running on Logic Apps. It's just providing a bunch of abstractions on top of that. So if you're a power user or someone who doesn't mind like clicking through like a WYSIWYG, or not a WYSIWYG, but a kind of guided experience, then Power Automate is for you. If you're a professional developer and you want to get in there and write some code and take advantage of some of the other capabilities in Logic Apps, you can go and do that. For most of the scenarios that finance and operations is involved with, using Power Automate should be sufficient versus going into Logic Apps.
Okay, but we, as a partner, we are not prohibited from using Logic Apps and with all the professional package which comes with it.
As a partner, you're prohibited from using...
We are not we're not discouraged to use Logic Apps.
You're not discouraged from using Logic Apps?
Yeah, well, I'm just kind of asking for automation.
Yeah, so are you discouraged from using Power Automate?
It seems that Power Automate is something for, let's say, citizen developers where kind of the customer's IT should be on top of
Yeah, so the
governance and everything. But like, if we are supposed to, as a partner, provide a tested, controllable script which does all of that, up until now we've been thinking that we should rather stick to Logic Apps.
Yeah, so the comment is basically around, in Logic Apps, you can have a tested, kind of controlled integration point there, a package. Yeah, Power Automate, you can take advantage of the solution capability. But yeah, if you're shipping a solution, yeah, you might want to look at Logic Apps. I don't have any hard and fast guidance around that, sorry. Yeah.
Microsoft says if it's a system talking to a system, then it should be Logic Apps. If
Okay.
it's user interaction, then it should be Flow and Automate.
The comment is if it's a system talking to a system, it should be Logic Apps. And if it's a user, then it should be Power Automate.
That's what docs.microsoft.com.
Okay, from the documentation, okay.
Yeah, so if you're
Okay.
using business events to trigger an integration, you need to be triggering Logic at endpoint or event hub instead.
Okay, nice. Yeah.
You're breaking that
Power Automate, yeah.
But I mean, if you've gone to any other sessions this week about Flow, you instantly hit this scenario where you need a premium connector, and the pricing of execution basis as opposed to action basis, it quickly becomes really expensive to use Flow in certain.
So the pricing of Power Automate might tip you towards using Logic Apps anyway, but they recommend using that for integrations between systems.
Well, it says on docs.microsoft.com, it says,
Right.
what's the difference between these? It says functions, Flow, and Logic Apps, and it says this is what you can do it.
Okay, nice. Okay, so the comment is on docs.microsoft.com. They have functions, Logic Apps, and then Power Automate differentiating between those. Okay, that's great. Other questions and comments? Yeah, you want to go up to the mic? Give you a couple seconds.
I was just wondering, it's probably not here on the topic, but could you share some details about data feeds?
Yeah, no. So data feeds is a, so I don't work on data feeds. That's a Sunil question. They are making progress on data feeds. Data feeds is meant to be a nice way to get data out. He has also talked about it addressing kind of the data change events side of things. Yeah, I don't have any hard information on data feeds. I believe that at least a preview might be available for platform update 33, so in April. Yeah.
Is Gokul Ramesh, does he know, is he part of the team?
The question is about Gokul Ramesh. Gokul Ramesh is a solutions architect, but he can get that information. Certainly if you're interested in, are you on the Yammer group? Yeah, you should ask in the business events group on Yammer about data feeds. Yeah, and probably do an @ message for Sunil. Sunil Garg would be a good one. Yeah, another question? You want to come up to the mic? Save me repeating it.
So we've done a variety of testing with extending the workflows from finance and operations into Flow.
Okay, nice.
And it's all test scenarios. And one of the scenarios is actually providing enough details in the email, such as your purchase order line items or expense report line items to approve.
Okay.
And it just seems a little awkward that you would have an approval button within the email if you do not actually have the line items. Now, granted, we have, of course, you can include a link, but there seems to be a bug right now where the link does not work.
Yeah.
And we've been promised that will be fixed in the PU 32, I believe.
Sure, yeah.
Yep. So one of the things we're working on is how do we get the line items into the Flow? And currently, the adaptive cards don't support HTML5 or repeating tables. So it's been a challenge, and it's just something I'm wondering, is this a vision of the approvals with finance and ops, or are we just really?
It is a vision.
Okay.
Yeah. Are you on the Yammer group?
Not yet. We don't go live till February.
Okay, you don't go live until February. Yeah, we should try that out. The vision is yes. The vision is that you would get the record, and then if you were interested in the line items, you would be able to use the record that comes out in the payload from the workflow business event to go and get those line items, and then you could list those off and format those nicely. So I created an example of that, but I don't think I created it inside of an approval. And you're saying it's not possible to put the formatted version. I know that the approval.
And real estate
Yeah.
is so small that
Yes. Yes. I know the approval and the notification options inside of Power Automate, they just kind of take all the text. You can have it on different lines, and it just takes all the text and like squashes it together. So that's why I used that send an email V2 action in my example for alerts. Yeah, so I'll have a look at that. I'll talk to the Power Automate guys about that. Other questions that people want to come to the mic for?
I have a question about that. How will be impact the performance with Power Automate with respecting to the, is something that the user could do, but the user will be tending to do a lot of flows or automates. So what about the performance with all those triggers acting at the same time?
Yeah. The business events are fairly light. Yeah, they're very light. They're meant to be that the actual triggering of the business event is taken care of in a separate batch process. So the kind of the main process is just putting some values into a class and then passing those to the business events framework. And it's just written to a table. It's just written to the database as a, hey, here's an event that you should trigger. There's a separate process or a separate like dedicated batch process that it's running in the background asynchronously that takes care of actually checking for the subscriptions and triggering that off. Yeah, so we haven't noticed any performance issues around that. We've been encouraging people to let us know if they find any performance issues, but certainly we'll want it to be nice and fast and light. And a lot of work went into making sure that it performed well as we were building the business events capabilities. Yeah. Other questions? No. Okay, well, I will stay around after this. If you could, you can put some feedback, if it'll let me switch to the next slide. Evaluate the session. I'll be up here for a little while to answer any other questions that you might have. Thanks, everyone.